Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into something that's been making headlines and sparking a lot of debate. We're talking about Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, yes. It's certainly a hot topic these days.
That it is. You sent over some research on it, and I have to admit, I'm really fascinated by this idea of a financial revolution. But at the same time, there's all this talk about the environmental impact, and I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure.
You're not kidding. I mean, even Elon Musk has been pretty vocal about it. Remember when he suspended Tesla payments in Bitcoin over those environmental concerns?
Like, he definitely brought the issue to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And it really boils down to understanding how Bitcoin actually works, specifically the process of Bitcoin mining.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. I kept hearing this term proof of work. What's that all about?
Proof of work, or POW, is it's the engine that powers Bitcoin. And as you have probably heard, it's notoriously energy intensive.
Yeah, that's what I keep seeing. So break it down for me. How does this proof of work thing actually work?
Okay, imagine it like a giant global puzzle competition. You have all these computers called miners, and they're racing to solve super complex math problems.
A puzzle competition, huh? Interesting analogy.
And the first one to crack the code gets to add the next block of transactions to something called the blockchain, which is essentially a permanent record of all Bitcoin transactions.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So the miners are competing, solving puzzles, and adding to this blockchain record.
Exactly. And for all their hard work, they get rewarded with, you guessed it, Bitcoin. But all this computing power doesn't come cheap, hence the energy concerns you were talking about.
I can imagine. We're talking thousands of computers running 24/7. I read somewhere it's using as much electricity as a small city.
The estimates are pretty staggering, yes. But the good news is that there are alternatives being explored that are much more environmentally friendly.
Oh yeah, like that proof of stake thing I saw mentioned in the articles.
Exactly. Proof of stake, or POS, is a different approach altogether. Instead of this energy-guzzling computational race, think of it more like a lottery system.
Okay, a crypto lottery. I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So instead of solving complex puzzles, validators, as they're called in this system, are chosen based on how much cryptocurrency they stake, basically putting up a portion of their holdings as collateral. The more you stake, the higher your chances of being selected to validate transactions and earn rewards.
Gotcha. So it's like putting your money where your mouth is to prove you're committed to the network. And since there's no puzzle-solving marathon going on, the energy consumption goes way down, right?
Exactly. We're talking a potential reduction of over 99% compared to proof of work, which is a huge difference.
Wow, 99%. That's incredible. So why isn't everyone switching over to proof of stake if it's so much better for the environment?
Well, there are some trade-offs to consider. While proof of stake is certainly more energy efficient, it also raises some concerns about potential centralization issues. Since those with the largest holdings have a higher chance of being selected as validators, they could potentially wield more influence over the network.
I see. So it's not a perfect solution. It's this balancing act between security and sustainability.
Precisely.
Which leads me to a question that's been on my mind. If proof of stake offers this way to make crypto more eco-friendly, could Bitcoin itself ever switch over from proof of work?
The million-dollar question. It's
Yeah.
more complicated than just flipping a switch, unfortunately. Ethereum, the second largest cryptocurrency, actually made the move to proof of stake recently. And so far, it seems to be working out pretty well.
Really? So if Ethereum can do it, why not Bitcoin?
Well, Bitcoin is, it's the OG cryptocurrency. It's much larger and more entrenched than Ethereum. To change something as fundamental as its consensus mechanism would require a massive agreement across the entire Bitcoin community.
Yeah.
And that's a very tall order.
Right. I guess it's kind of like trying to turn a giant ship. It takes a lot of time and coordinated effort to change course.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so we've got this tension between Bitcoin's energy consumption and the potential for greener solutions like proof of stake. But it seems like the whole world of blockchain is expanding way beyond just Bitcoin these days. I keep hearing about DeFi and NFTs. How do those fit into the picture?
You're absolutely right. The blockchain universe is exploding with possibilities. DeFi, or decentralized finance, is basically a way to bypass traditional financial institutions like banks. We're talking lending, borrowing, earning interest, all without needing a middleman.
Wow, that's pretty radical. And what about NFTs? I know they're like digital collectibles or something.
Yeah, NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, are unique digital assets. Think digital art, collectibles, even virtual real estate.
Hmm.
They're changing the way we think about ownership in the digital world.
So it's like this whole new digital economy emerging, and it's all built on blockchain technology.
Exactly. And the decisions made about things like consensus mechanisms, whether it's proof of work or proof of stake, have a ripple effect across all these different areas. The environmental impact of these emerging technologies is directly tied to those decisions.
So it's like we're standing at this crossroads, deciding what kind of future we want to build with these powerful tools. It's both exciting and a little daunting.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, one thing I've been wondering about is the role of regulation in all of this. How does that play into Bitcoin's journey to becoming more mainstream?
Regulation is going to be crucial for mainstream acceptance of Bitcoin. There's no doubt about it. Clear regulatory frameworks can help build trust for investors, protect consumers, and make sure everything's above board.
So it's about striking a balance between encouraging innovation and ensuring responsible development.
Exactly. A good example is what's happening in the European Union with their MiCA regulation. It's a big step towards creating a more consistent and transparent regulatory landscape for crypto assets.
It sounds like having clear guidelines is important for getting big institutions and the general public on board with cryptocurrencies. But what else needs to happen for Bitcoin to truly go mainstream?
Well, aside from the regulation, we need to overcome a few other hurdles. User-friendliness, for one. Right now, the whole process of buying, selling, and storing Bitcoin can be pretty intimidating for the average person. We need simpler, more intuitive platforms.
Yeah, I get that. It can seem like a whole other language if you're not tech savvy.
Exactly. And along with that, we need to close the knowledge gap. Many people still have no idea what Bitcoin is or how it works.
So it's like we have this amazing technology with huge potential, and we're figuring out how to make it more sustainable and accessible to everyone. But the big question is, can Bitcoin really overcome these hurdles and become both a financial revolution and a champion for a better future?
That is the big question, isn't it? And it's one we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into this fascinating and complex world.
Well said. And you know what? I have to say, I was a little hesitant about this topic at first, but this is turning out to be way more interesting than I expected.
Huh. I'm glad to hear that.
I'm actually really curious to hear more. Let's dive into some of these challenges and opportunities in more detail. Okay, so we've established that Bitcoin has these serious energy challenges, but the potential of cryptocurrency is hard to ignore. So how do we reconcile those two things?
It's a really good question, and a lot of brilliant minds are working on it. And as we said earlier, that choice of consensus mechanism, proof of work versus proof of stake, has a huge impact on the carbon footprint.
Right. And we were talking about how Ethereum made that leap to proof of stake, but it seems like for Bitcoin, it's way more complicated. So what are some other ideas out there for making Bitcoin more sustainable?
Well, one interesting idea is using renewable energy sources to power Bitcoin mining. Like, picture huge solar or wind farms powering all those computers.
Oh, I see. So you're basically cleaning up the energy source rather than changing the whole system.
Exactly. And there's some really promising projects already happening in this area. Like, there are some mining operations being set up in places with lots of geothermal or hydroelectric power.
It's pretty cool to think that Bitcoin mining could actually help push for wider adoption of renewable energy sources.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing being explored is something called Layer 2 scaling solutions. They're basically like separate networks built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain that can handle a ton of transactions off-chain.
So kind of like creating an express lane for transactions to reduce congestion on the main network.
That's a perfect analogy. So by moving a lot of those transactions away from the main blockchain, these Layer 2 solutions can really decrease the computational workload, which in turn lowers the energy consumption of the whole Bitcoin network.
That sounds really promising. Are there any examples of Layer 2 solutions in action?
Yeah, for sure. The Lightning Network is a great example. It's a decentralized network that lets people do super fast and low-fee Bitcoin transactions. It's becoming a pretty popular way to make Bitcoin more practical for everyday use and at the same time reduce its environmental impact.
That's great. All this stuff is super encouraging. But even with all these technological advances, I still wonder if Bitcoin can ever really address its energy issues and gain widespread acceptance.
It's true, the energy question is a big one.
Yeah.
But maybe we need to think bigger. What if, instead of focusing on just Bitcoin's energy consumption, we thought about the positive impact it could have on the world?
I like where you're going with this. You mean like the social impact of Bitcoin?
Exactly. For example, Bitcoin could totally change how people in developing countries access financial services, places where traditional banks aren't really an option.
Yeah, I read about that in one of those articles you sent. Bitcoin could really empower people by giving them control over their own money without needing to rely on those middlemen who might not even be available to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it also has the potential to make microloans and remittances way easier, which would provide some much-needed economic opportunities for people who really need them.
It's like it's not just about making money, it's about creating opportunities for people.
I agree. And we can't forget about how Bitcoin could help create more transparency and accountability in different sectors. Like its permanent record, the blockchain, can be used to track supply chains, make sure trade is fair, and even fight corruption.
Wow. It's starting to feel like Bitcoin, even with the issues it has, could actually be a force for good in the world.
I think it definitely could be. But we got to be aware of the potential downsides too, right? Like Bitcoin can be used for criminal activity if it's not properly regulated.
That's a good point. Like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It all depends on how we use it and what kind of protections we have in place.
Exactly. And that's why having good regulation is so important. We need clear rules to minimize risks, protect people, and make sure innovation happens in a responsible way.
It sounds like we're starting to see a more balanced and complete picture of Bitcoin. It's not just a digital currency, it's a complex technology with lots of possible uses and consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. We can't look at Bitcoin as just a good thing or a bad thing. We have to weigh the trade-offs and consider the long-term impact. The goal should be to use this technology to benefit everyone.
What I'm taking away from this is that it's not a black and white issue, We have to think about all sides of it.
You get it.
This is giving me a lot to think about. Out of curiosity, what were your first impressions of Bitcoin?
When I first heard about Bitcoin, I gotta be honest, I was pretty skeptical. Like I thought it was just some internet trend, like a digital version of monopoly money or something. But then when I started to understand the technology behind it and what it could do, I got hooked.
So what was it that convinced you Bitcoin was more than just a passing fad?
It was realizing that Bitcoin represents this huge change in how we think about money and value. It's not controlled by any one person or organization, and that's pretty revolutionary. There are definitely still some challenges, but the possibility that Bitcoin could change the financial system and make it fairer is what keeps me so interested in it.
I can tell you're really passionate about this. It's kind of rubbing off on me too, I have to say.
It's definitely something to get excited about.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of exciting things, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one crucial part we haven't talked about yet. What about the people behind Bitcoin? The ones coding it, the investors, the everyday users.
Oh, you're right. The human side of this is a big part of the story.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about that next. Okay, so we've talked about the tech, the environment, the potential social impact, but what about the people behind Bitcoin? Who are these Bitcoin believers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting mix of people, all drawn to Bitcoin for different reasons.
Like, I imagine there are tech people, those who distrust governments, and probably some just looking to make a quick buck.
You're definitely right about some of those groups. You have the early adopters, like those cypherpunks, who were drawn to Bitcoin because it was decentralized and private. They wanted a currency that wasn't controlled by governments.
So they were kind of the trailblazers, the ones who saw the potential from the beginning.
Exactly. And then you've got those who are more idealistic. They think Bitcoin can make the world a better place by giving people more financial freedom, making things more transparent, and giving more power to individuals. They see it as a way to make the financial system fairer.
That's pretty cool how one thing can attract such different types of people with different goals.
It really shows how powerful Bitcoin could be. It's not just a technology, it's like a movement, a philosophy, a way to challenge the way things are.
And what about the investors? The ones putting big money into Bitcoin. What do they see that maybe the average person doesn't?
Well, more and more big investors, like hedge funds, and even some governments, are starting to see Bitcoin as a real asset, something worth investing in. They see it as a way to protect themselves against inflation, a safe haven in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable.
So it's not just about the hype anymore. They're starting to see Bitcoin as something that's here to stay.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are the everyday users, the people who are actually using Bitcoin to send money, buy things online, or just add to their savings.
It's wild to think that something that started as this niche internet thing is now becoming more and more a part of our lives.
It just shows how innovative and resilient the Bitcoin community is. They've built this solid network that survived all kinds of challenges and keeps getting stronger.
But we can't ignore the negative stuff, right? I mean, there's still a chance for scams, hacks, illegal activities.
You're right. We can't pretend that Bitcoin is perfect. Like any new technology, there are going to be people who try to take advantage of it.
So how do we deal with those risks without stopping innovation and people using it?
Education is huge. People need to know the risks, how to protect themselves, how to spot scams.
Right, like with anything else, the more you know, the better decisions you can make.
Exactly. And regulation is really important too. We need clear rules to make sure things are safe, transparent, and that people are protected.
So it's that balance again, right? Encouraging the good stuff while protecting people from the bad.
That's the key, for sure. And there's no easy answer. But I really believe that if we have smart regulations, keep educating people, and the Bitcoin community keeps doing what they're doing, we can create a future where this technology makes the world a better place.
This whole deep dive has been amazing. I have to say, I started off pretty skeptical about Bitcoin, but now I'm definitely more curious, maybe even a little optimistic about it.
I'm glad to hear that. It's exciting to see more and more people getting interested in Bitcoin and what it could do.
So as we wrap up, what's the main takeaway you would want our listeners to remember?
I would say, don't just dismiss Bitcoin or blindly buy into the hype. Learn about it. Think about the potential benefits and the risks. Then you can decide for yourself if it's something you want to be a part of.
That's great advice. And like we said at the beginning, this is a constantly changing space. Things are changing all the time. Stay curious, keep learning, and be a part of the conversation about the future of money.
It's been great talking to you about this, and I hope our listeners enjoyed learning about Bitcoin as much as I did.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning. The world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is vast and full of surprises. Who knows what amazing things are just around the corner? Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.